Hello everyone. In this video, we will learn about the first come first served scheduling algorithm. First come first served scheduling. In this scheme, the process that requests the CPU first is allocated the CPU first. The implementation of the FCFS policy is easily managed with the FIFO queue. When a process enters the ready queue, its process control block is linked on to the tail of the queue. When the CPU is free, it is allocated to the process at the head of the queue. The running process is then removed from the queue. The average waiting time under the FCFS policy is often quite long. Let us see a few problems in FCFS scheduling. These are the three processes P1, P2, P3 and the burst times are 24, 3 and 3. Let us assume that the processes have arrived in the order P1, P2 and P3. The Gantt chart for the problem is this. P1 will begin at time 0, it will end at 24. P2's burst time is 3, so it will end at 27. And P3's burst time is 3, so if it begins at 27, it will end at 30. Waiting time of P1 is 0 because as soon as it arrived at time 0, it started its execution. So the waiting time of P1 is 0. Now the waiting time of P2. The waiting time of P2 is 24. It is because P2 has been waiting in the queue during this time period, that is 0 to 24. P2's waiting time is 24 and P3's waiting time is 27. Average waiting time is 17 milliseconds. The turnaround time. Turnaround time is the time interval between the submission time and the completion time. The turnaround time of P1 is 24. The submission time is 0. The completion time is 24. 0 to 24. So 24 milliseconds is the turnaround time. Turnaround time of P2 is 27. The submission time is 0 and the completion time is 27. Turnaround time of P3 is 30. That is, the submission time is 0 and the completion time is 30. 0 to 30. Average turnaround time is 27 milliseconds. Now, let us change the order of arrival as P2, P3, P1. So, the Gantt chart for this schedule is this. P2, it begins at 0, it will end at 3. Then comes P3, whose burst time is 3. So, it starts at 3 and it will end at 6. P1's burst time is 24, so it will begin at 6 and it will end at 30. Now, looking at the waiting time for each process. P1's waiting time, it has arrived at 0. So, while P2 and P3 were executed, this P1 must have been waiting. So, the waiting time of P1 is 6 milliseconds and waiting time of P2 is 0 because as soon as it arrived, it started its execution. Waiting time of P3 is 3. By the time P2 is getting executed, P3 must have waited. So the waiting time of P3 is 3 milliseconds. The average waiting time is 3 milliseconds. It's better than the previous case. So in FCFS, we should understand a term called convoy effect. It is happening because a short process behind a long process. That is, a short process, if it is stuck behind a long process, it leads to an inefficient resource utilization. That is convoy effect. In this problem, we have 4 processes and arrival times and the burst times are given. We need to calculate the completion time, turnaround time and waiting time for each process. This is the Gantt chart for the given problem. At time 0, P1 begins. The burst time of P1 is 5. So it ends at 5. Then comes P2, which has arrived at time 1. The burst time of P2 is 3. So when it begins at 5, it will end at 8. Then the next process which has arrived is time P3 at time 2. The burst time of P3 is 8. So if it begins at 8, it will end at 16. Then comes P4 at time 3. If it begins at 16, it will end at 22 as the burst time is 6. Let us see the waiting time and the turnaround time of each and every process. Now, for P1, the completion time is 5. For P2, the completion time is 8. For P3, the completion time is 16. For P4, the completion time is 22. Once the completion times are listed, it is so easy to compute the turnaround time. That is, the turnaround time is the time interval between the submission time and the completion time. So P1's turnaround time is the difference between the arrival time 0 and the completion time 5. So the turnaround time is 5. For P2, the arrival time is 1, completion time is 8. So the difference is 7. That is the turnaround time. For P3, the arrival time is 2, the completion time is 16. So the difference 14 is the turnaround time. For P4, the arrival time is 3, completion time is 22. The difference is 19 and that is the turnaround time. And for waiting time of P1 is 0 because the arrival time is 0 and immediately we have allowed P1 to continue, so the waiting time is 0. And for P2, the arrival time is 1, but it started its execution at time 5, so the waiting time is 4. For P3, the arrival time is 2, but it started its execution at 8, so the P3 has been waiting in the queue for 6 milliseconds. P4 arrival time is 3. It started its execution at time 16. So P4 has been waiting in the queue for 13 milliseconds. Average waiting time is 5.75 milliseconds. Average turnaround time is 11.25 milliseconds. In this video, we have discussed about the first come first serve scheduling. Thank you.